Good evening, everybody. My name is Luis Pereira, the Director of Planning at the Department of Planning and Economic Development at the City of St. Paul. I wanted to welcome you to this webinar for the 1 to 4 unit housing study phase 2. And so tonight we're going to have a presentation with some question and answer opportunity after. But we also have an opportunity in the Q&A section of the webinar where you can put your questions in, and we'll try to get to those as efficiently as possible as we go, or save some of them for later in the session. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the 1 to 4 unit team. So I'll start by throwing it to Josh Williams. Thanks for coming.
Yes, hello everybody. As Louis said, thanks for coming. If you see some spots on my shirt, it's because I had trouble drinking water just a moment ago. But again, thank you for coming. We look forward to this event, and we'll do our best to keep your questions answered. Michael?
Hi everybody, my name is Michael Wade. I'm also a planner on this team with the Planning and Economic Development Department. I'll be monitoring your questions in the Q&A section and answering some of them as we go. Many of them will leave for broader discussion in the Q&A session after the presentation. Glad you all are here. Thanks, Emma.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. My name is Emma Brown. I'm a city planner with PED, and I'm the project lead for the study. So I'm going to get started on our presentation, and thank you all for coming. All right, so this is a 1 to 4 unit housing study, phase 2. We're going to be talking about the zoning text amendments, and this is the second webinar. We had the first webinar on Tuesday. Right, so just a guide to this webinar. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the project website, which is listed up there. So in order to ask a question, you can click the Q&A button, you can type in your question. Michael may publish it for public viewing or potentially answer it in the chat if it's a simpler question. Otherwise, we'll be answering the questions after the presentation. If your question doesn't get answered in the level of detail that you're looking for, please feel free to email us with a little bit more clarification for your question. There's also my phone number up there if you'd like to talk. All right, so an agenda. So we're going to be talking about the study's background and context, the process and the current zoning districts, the proposed zoning districts as part of the draft ordinance, some updates to the cluster development and accessory dwelling unit or ADU standards, some housing examples, what can be built under the proposed new regulations, subdivision regulations update, our schedule and ways to engage, and then that'll be followed by the moderated Q&A. All right, so study background and context. So this study was initiated back in April 2021. It was split up into 2 different phases. Phase 1 has been effective since March 2022. This phase allowed for physically smaller homes and made ADU regulations a little bit more flexible, especially with the removal of the owner occupancy requirement and allowing them on smaller lots. It also increased flexibility overall. Phase 2, this is the current phase that we're talking about tonight. It is focused on allowing a greater mix of housing types, including duplexes, townhomes, cluster developments, and updating a wide range of zoning standards in order to facilitate this greater range of housing. Right, so this study was called for in a 2018 City Council resolution, which calls to create and preserve housing that's affordable at all income levels, and did specifically call for a zoning study to explore allowing more multi-unit buildings along transit routes and neighborhood nodes in single-family zoning districts. The 2040 Comprehensive Plan has policies that call for transit supportive density, economically diverse neighborhoods, maximized housing and locational choices for residents of all income levels, and permitting small single-family homes and duplexes, pocket neighborhoods, cottage communities, and also a mix of single-family housing types that is sensitive to the surrounding neighborhood context. There are also policies that are specific to the future land uses So this is the future land use map in the 2040 comprehensive plan related to neighborhood nodes, which are the black circles on the map that represent about a quarter-mile radius. We have policies that call for focused growth and increased density towards the center of the node. For the urban neighborhoods, which are the big yellow swaths on the map, these are the primarily residential areas. These policies call for medium density housing compatible with the general scale of urban neighborhoods. And another policy also calls for expanded housing types to include duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, small scale multifamily, also allowing for neighborhood scale density increases, broadened housing choices, and intergenerational living. There are 7 objectives for the study based on the policy direction: increasing housing choice to meet St. Paul's housing needs, increasing housing type equity by allowing greater opportunities for neighborhood scale housing in every neighborhood of the city, to once again permit 1 to 2 unit types by right, which is consistent with the city's history, where duplexes were more widely permitted, allowed in residential areas before the 1975 zoning code update. Encouraging and promoting reuse of existing homes and infill development in lots and backyards, while discouraging demolition of existing viable housing. Another one is especially empower homeowners and small developers to engage in infill development, and encourage family size and workforce housing through zoning bonuses, and overall make the zoning code easier to read, navigate, and understand. All right, so household types and housing options. So the pie chart shows the breakdown of the city's housing types. 1-person households are the most common household type, followed by 2-person households. Over the next 10 years, the Metropolitan Council projects that 1-person households are growing at the fastest rate by 26%, and all other household types are growing at a lower rate of 13% over the next 20 years. Since 2010, the percent of households with at least 1 person under 18 has decreased a little bit. The percent of households with at least 1 person over 60 has increased by much more, by 10%. And then households with 4 or more people, this also has increased since 2010. There's a new trend. There's a rise in extended family and multi-generational living. Also an increase in doubling up in housing. And then on the right side, what are the housing options today? So this shows the number of housing units by housing type in 2000 and 2017. 1 unit detached and 1 unit attached, or townhomes, twin homes. Those have increased. The greatest growth was in apartment buildings with 20 or more units. The 2 to 4 unit housing types and 5 to 19 unit housing types are disappearing from the housing stock. In terms of the most dominant housing type, 50% of the housing units are in single family detached. You could probably imagine seeing all the single family homes that we have in the city. This does reflect the current emphasis on single family homes, as 72% of the residentially zoned land only allows for detached single family homes. And then units in buildings with 20 or more units also makes up 31% of the city's housing units. And then finally, small scale multifamily, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes only make up 11% of the city's housing units. While 2 to 4 plexes are disappearing from the city's housing stock, these neighborhood scale housing types, or missing middle, as you could call it, these are part of St. Paul's history. So many of the city's oldest neighborhoods already have duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and an occasional second smaller home and carriage houses that are placed behind homes that are located closer to the street. There are even some clustered multifamily buildings that are grouped around a common open space and courtyards. The 1922 zoning code, this had 3 residential zoning districts, and single family and duplexes were permitted in districts A and B. So that's a large part of the city. And then all residential districts or uses, including multifamily, were also permitted in the C residence district and in commercial and industrial. So these types of housing types were more widely permitted. The city is also experiencing a housing shortage. The housing underproduction is a metric to compare metro areas in terms of the difference between total housing need and total housing availability. The Twin Cities is the 13th most underproducing of 309 metro areas. It's over 80,000 units short of providing enough housing to meet the need. In addition, the new housing being built is no longer the more affordable starter homes that we're used to seeing. Only 8% of new single-family homes in the U.S. are 14,000 square feet or less. Related to the lack of affordable starter homes, the median St. Paul sales price is $280,000, which is affordable to a 4-person household, just below 80% of AMI, which is around $117,000 annual salary. Home ownership rate, we are consistently lower than the US rate. In St. Paul, this continues to decline, and the Twin Cities has the highest Black-white home ownership disparity in the top 20 most underproduced metro areas. All right, so the current process, or study process and current zoning. Okay, so this slide is a summary of the phase 2 process that's been happening since summer 2021. The top is the work that staff has done a lot of research and analysis. We've engaged with city zoning, site plan review, building plan review staff. Last winter and spring, we did a lot of engagement events. We had an online survey. We did some virtual engagement sessions that were co-hosted by district councils. We do have a summary report on the project website summarizing the results of the activities and events. If you're interested in looking at that, it's on the project website. We also engaged a technical advisory committee, interviewed other professionals in the small scale development fields, all before drafting the text amendments and conducting an internal review. And then on the bottom, this is the work done by the consultant team of Jim Kuhn and Neil Heller. They have expertise in zoning code reviews, site design, and financial pro forma analysis. So they did a lot of analysis for us. Zoning code and parcel analysis, they did a spot testing and developed conceptual housing types, and financial pro forma analysis. All right, so from the financial pro forma analysis that the consultants did, these are some of the key takeaways. For the homeowners with equity, the code could enable middle income owners and small developers to build ADUs that could serve modest rents in the 50 to 60% of AMI level. So there is a high cost to add these units to a backyard, but they do pencil out financially. The for sale development case studies show that it is possible to serve home buyers at the 60 to 80% of AMI level, especially when sufficient density is permitted by zoning. But then the existing single family for sale development does serve a similar affordability level, but again, there is existing scarcity of these starter homes that are smaller and more affordable. For the rental projects, many case studies suggest that they are not viable development projects for large-scale market rate developers. So those large-scale market rate developers, they're looking at gaining a 15 to 80% rate of return. These projects are not getting that level of return. So local developers or investors with equity who want to improve the neighborhood and address the housing shortage are more likely to take on these types of projects for a lower return. And these case studies showed us how important it is that by right development is, because small scale developers are unlikely to take the risk of rezoning a property just for that small 6 to 10% return, because that time and cost to rezone cannot be absorbed if the rezoning does not get approved. This slide summarizes the key standards of the zoning districts that the study is evaluating. So RL, this is a semi-rural district. It's located in a very small portion of the city, just in the Highwood area. It's not consistently served by municipal sewer and water. Many of them utilize septic systems. It's located within the Mississippi River Critical Corridor area, and it has steep slopes and extensive vegetation cover. It currently permits one-family dwellings and has a half-acre minimum lot size per unit, a 3-story, 30-foot height maximum, and large setbacks. The RL through R4 districts, these are four single-family districts that range in minimum lot size per unit from 5,000 square feet to 9,600 square feet per unit. There's a 3-story, 30-foot height limit, slightly varying setbacks that are within the 25 to 30-foot range for the front and a 25-foot rear setback. These districts also only permit one-family dwellings. The RT1 district, this is the two-family district that permits one and two-family dwellings. It has a smaller minimum lot size per unit of 3,000 square feet per unit. There's a 3-story and slightly higher 40-foot height limit and similar minimum setbacks. And then RT2, this is the townhouse district that currently permits 1 through 4 family dwellings and also townhouses with up to 6 attached units. The RT2 has a lower lot size per unit of 2,000 square feet per unit, a 20-foot minimum lot width per unit, and has the same maximum height and minimum setback standards as RT1. For the proposed zoning districts as part of the draft ordinance. Okay, so this slide shows an overview of the current zoning districts on the left side in comparison to the proposed. We currently have RL that is proposed to remain the same in terms of the name and the land that is zoned RL, but also allowing for duplexes. The current R1 through R3 one-family district is proposed to be consolidated into a new H1 residential that permits a maximum number of 3 units on interior lots and 4 units on corner lots. R4, RT1, and RT2 are proposed to be consolidated into a new H2 that permits up to 4 units. And a new H3 is proposed to be the current R1 through RT2 parcels that are within 1/8 of a mile of neighborhood nodes and transit routes along fixed rail and BRT corridors. And R3 is proposed to allow a maximum of 6 units on a lot. This is the proposed zoning map. You can see RL remains just in Highwood. Again, this is not consistently served by municipal sewer and water. It has special characteristics. H1, this is the bright yellow shading on the map, the current R1 through R3 parcels. And then H2 is the slightly darker yellow on the map, the current R4, RT1, and RT2 parcels. Then the darkest tan color on the map is H3, which are the current R1 through RT2 parcels that are within 1/8 of a mile of neighborhood nodes and fixed rail and BRT corridors, including the existing green line and A line, and then others that are in the works, including the gold line, the purple line, the B line, Riverview, and the G line routes. So this slide summarizes the new H1, H2, and H3 districts. So all of these districts permit 1-family, 2-family, and multiple family dwellings. They have the same reduced setback standards for increased flexibility. The maximum height is in the 30 to 40-foot range, with additional height permitted by stepping back a distance equal to the additional height. And there's also an overall lot coverage maximum for all buildings, instead of how we do it currently, where there's a separate lot coverage for principal buildings and a separate lot coverage for accessory buildings. So this is just one simplified maximum lot coverage that ranges from 40 to 50%. I'm just looking at a few differences between the districts. H1 is proposed to allow a maximum of 3 principal units on interior lots and 4 principal units on corner lots. It's also eligible for a density bonus up to 2 additional units, which I'll talk about in a few slides. There's a much reduced lot area minimum per unit of 2,000 square feet per unit, and a lot width minimum that is not per unit, so just a minimum of 30 feet. And H2 is proposed to allow a maximum of 4 principal units on a lot, and it is eligible for the same density bonus. It has a slightly lower lot area minimum per unit and lot width compared to H1. And then H3, this is the district for neighborhood nodes and fixed rail and BRT corridors, proposed to allow a maximum of 6 units on a lot. There is a very low lot area per unit of 1,000 square feet and 20-foot minimum lot width. There's also a new condition proposed for new 1-family dwellings to have a maximum floor area of 2,500 square feet. So this is above the average single-family home. And so H3, it is near transit and neighborhood nodes that are intended for higher density. So with this standard, we're hoping to steadily discourage building very large one-family homes, and in turn encourage the development of greater density near neighborhood nodes and transit routes to take advantage of those amenities. For RL, just some highlights to the RL district, allowing a maximum of 2 principal units on a lot, permitting duplexes. There's a much lower lot area per unit standard, and a 60-foot minimum lot width. The maximum height of 30 feet is maintained, and then setbacks are greatly reduced, and there's a proposed maximum lot coverage of 40%, which matches with the H1 standard. Okay, so I did mention a density bonus. So there's a new density bonus for providing workforce or attainable housing and family size units in H1 and H2. So density bonuses for workforce and family size housing, these are objectives of the study. The density bonus, or what you get, is 1 or 2 additional units allowed beyond the maximum number of units permitted. So H1 and H2 would be permitted to have 5 or 6 units on a lot. These units do not count towards the lot area minimum per unit standard. You also get an incentive of 5% additional permitted lot coverage to accommodate for the additional units. And how you get the bonus, there are 2 options for how to get this bonus. The first option is providing 1 or 2 units that's affordable to 80% of AMI for at least 15 years and has the same floor area as another dwelling unit on the lot. This is to ensure that the bonus affordable unit is comparable to other units on the lot. And the other option is to provide 1 or 2 principal units that contains 3 or more bedrooms. Just so looking at some examples, I'm just going to go through the top blue example. So on H1, there's a maximum number of 3 or 4 units by right that's subject to the lot area per unit. On a 4,000 square foot lot, the maximum number of units permitted by right is 2, because it's 2,000 square feet per unit, and the lot coverage is 40%. And if the developer of the lot decides to take advantage of the density bonus and includes 2 80% of AMI units or 2 family size units, then 4 units on a lot would be permitted, and the maximum lot coverage increases by 5% to 45%. Now some updates to the cluster development and accessory dwelling unit standards. So the cluster development standards were modernized to provide greater flexibility by allowing more housing types and additional neighborhood scale dwellings on larger lots if adequate common open space and pedestrian connections are built within the development. So one change is that all housing types of up to 4 units in one building are permitted. The minimum street frontage requirement is replaced with a minimum lot size of 9,600 square feet, which is about 2 commonly sized 40-foot wide lots. There's a maximum of a ½ acre to protect against property acquisition of an entire block by developers. And then clusters are also proposed to be a permitted use with the option for a conditional use permit that I'll talk about on the next slide. The cluster development still needs to meet the dimensional standards of the zoning district that it's located in, except for the lot coverage, because cluster developments are proposed to have a 55 or 60% lot coverage for all buildings, which is a 10 to 15% increase over what's allowed in H1 through H3 without a cluster development. It's proposed that 1 ADU for each 1 family dwelling is permitted, and ADUs do not count towards the minimum lot area per unit requirement. For principal buildings, there are requirements to have an entrance on the common open space or being connected to it or face the street or face the open space or the path. They also need to meet the design standards that we have for all buildings. Right. There's some additional standards. There's a common open space standard to ensure usable area that's a minimum of 150 square feet per unit that can contain landscaping, lawn area, gardens, recreational amenities, but impervious elements cannot exceed 75% of the area, and driveways and parking areas do not count as common open space. There are also standards for the connecting pedestrian path, and that they're Could be one community building for shared use. There's also a conditional use permit option for designs that desire to have a lower lot area per unit standard than what the district standard is. So these would be at a little bit higher density. So with this conditional use permit option, we're thinking about kind of tiny homes, yard homes, ADU sized homes in this option where the floor area of each unit would not exceed 600 square feet. And because of that, there would be no ADUs. Right, so then we have some proposed updates to accessory dwelling unit standards, or ADUs. ADUs are secondary to a principal one-family dwelling and can be within or attached to a one-family dwelling or in a detached accessory building. It's proposed that there can be up to 2 for each one-family dwelling on a lot, with one needing to be detached from the one-family home if there are 2. This is to avoid creation of a triplex, essentially, by building code standards, which are kind of bring other issues with fire requirements and other requirements. So we are trying to avoid that and make things simpler for the developer. The unit size is proposed to be 800 square feet or 75% of the floor area of the principal dwelling unit, whichever is greater. So this increases equity for properties with existing homes that are smaller by creating kind of like a baseline minimum of 800 square feet for the ADU floor area. There is a maximum height of 25 feet for accessory buildings with dwelling units, regardless of the height of the principal structure. And the current code language is more limiting to lots with shorter principal structures. The unit occupancy for the principal unit and the ADU remains to be limited by the number of occupants specified in the definition of household, which is 6 units and any number of children in their care. So because ADUs do not count towards the zoning district's lot area per unit standard, limiting the unit occupancy helps to limit the level of density, while also allowing for sort of an inconspicuous way to add more housing to a lot with an existing one-family dwelling. And then ownership requirements, these remain the same, that the ADU cannot be sold separately from the principal dwelling unit, and there are requirements for access and entrances that are remaining the same. Right, so now I'm just going to go through just a couple of housing examples based on the consultant's conceptual housing types to see what could be built under these proposed regulations. So this is just an example looking at 3 total units on a lot. So on the top, we have a one-family dwelling with 2 accessory dwelling units, 2 ADUs. The ADUs are in the one ADU building. So that's the back building here. So these are the 2 ADUs. And then this is the single family home. And then these are in separate buildings on the right side. So these are the 2 ADUs and this is the single family home. So these would be permitted. So the minimum lot size, you can see on the right here, minimum lot size required. This is just for the one principal unit. So it just accommodates that one unit in the front. So these numbers are quite small. But again, this is because the one family dwelling and the ADUs are limited by the number of occupants. And then the bottom, we have some examples of 3 principal units. The first example is a one family dwelling in a duplex. And then the second example is 3 one-family homes. You can also imagine that a triplex would be another example of this. The minimum lot size required here is larger than the top example because the minimum lot size required is for 3 principal buildings. So you do accommodate, you take the lot area per unit standard and multiply that by 3. So it is larger than the top example. It does range the 3,000 to 6,000 square feet lot size, and these are pretty typical in the city. Okay, so subdivision regulation updates. Okay, so here are some options for splitting up a lot. For lots on an alley, number 1 shows a vertical lot split right down the middle. This is typically how you would split up a lot, resulting in 2 typical lots. Number 2, this shows a horizontal lot split resulting in a flag lot, which is the back lot in blue. So this is a flag, so you can see kind of the flag here, and then this is considered kind of to be the pole part. So flag lots are currently permitted by the city. We just don't have a lot of them. But with this, we're providing more options. And another one of those is a reverse flag lot. So that's a new lot that we are proposing to allow. That's the lot in green. So just an upside down flag, the flag part here, and then the pole part going towards the alley. And number 3 is another horizontal lot split resulting in this new lot, which is we're calling a back lot. This only has access to the alley. And then again, uses this reverse flag lot that has access to the street and the alley. So these two options provide more flexibility for accommodating lots that already have a home on them, just allowing another option to help save existing housing while also adding the potential to have another lot in their backyard or on the side. For lots not on an alley, number 4 shows a vertical lot split resulting in the typical lots again. And then number 5 is a horizontal lot split resulting in a flag lot again and a typical lot. So the proposed amendments in this section, they increase opportunities for more neighborhood scale housing and infill development by allowing these new types of lots, a back lot and a reverse flag lot. And there are lot standards that ensure that the resulting lots and future development can meet the requirements for access and utilities. Okay, so now we are going to the schedule and ways to engage. All right, so January through February, this past just a few months ago, this study went through the Comprehensive and Neighborhood Planning Committee, or CNPC. This is the committee that reviews zoning studies before going to the full Planning Commission. On March 3rd, the Planning Commission did release this set of amendments for public review. Now, March and April, we are doing additional community engagement. We're doing these webinars, outreach to organizations, and other events. There's a public hearing planned at Planning Commission for April 14th. And then after that process, in late spring, the CNPC will consider the staff response to the public testimony that we received at the public hearing. The CNPC will make a recommendation to the full Planning Commission. And then tentatively planned for early summer, the Planning Commission will make a final recommendation about these proposed amendments to the City Council. And then the amendments will be going through the City Council adoption process, which will include another public hearing. And then if everything goes well, 30 days later, assuming that there is mayoral approval, the ordinance will take into effect and will shift into implementation mode, which will include making website updates and making sure that we provide resources for developers and homeowners and prospective homeowners about what can be built in the city based on the new zoning. Some ways to engage. So again, we have our project website. On the project website, you can review the staff report memo. We also have some really good overview slides, which are kind of just a longer version of this presentation, but it kind of touches on all the topics that are in the memo. We also have some FAQs, some translated versions of those. We also have an interactive zoning map, and the zoning map is really cool. You can type in your address and take a look at the current zoning and then what's proposed for your property. You can also sign up for the email list. And then the Planning Commission released some questions for the community to help people frame their public comments. These are really good questions. Just some examples are, does the draft ordinance propose a zoning approach that supports more housing options for all St. Paul residents in a fair and neutral way? Why or why not? There's also a question, should more areas be rezoned to the proposed new H3 district? If so, which locations and why? There's also questions about the distinction between the H1 district and the H2 district. Is that needed? So all of these topics and a few others are things that we are specifically hoping to hear from you on. But of course, we welcome any feedback. You can also watch the webinar if you want to watch this again, but share it with your friends and family, and if they're interested in this study, we are recording these webinars. They will be available. You can also send comments by email or by mail by noon on Thursday, April 14th. And then additionally, you can testify at the Planning Commission public hearing, which is planned for Friday, April 14th, and that's at City Hall. All right, so with that, I think we can begin the Q&A. We got some good questions. Here we go.
You know, hello there. So we have today actually just 2 questions. Looks like we just got one in, and I will let Luis and Josh check that one out. While we're doing that, I think we did just want to bring up some topics that we were asked about at the last webinar, just some additional information to talk about. One thing, Emma, would you kind of describe the difference between zoning changes and land use changes? When a property's zoning is changed, what does that mean versus what can actually happen on that property, or what is happening on that property?
Yes, I'm going to flip back to the proposed zoning district standards. So when you have a zoning change, kind of just opening up what's an option for this property. So, you know, instead of having just a single family home being permitted in a large majority of the properties in the city, there would be these new standards that would allow you to build 3 or 4 units based on the size of your property, and you would be meeting these kind of new standards. So a zoning change just opens up the possibility for other development, but land use, that doesn't change overnight. That would be a change that the property owner would need to make based on what would be permitted in the property. So zoning, while you see 3 and 4 units, 6 units, it doesn't mean that all of the properties are just all of a sudden going to be 3, 4, 5 or 6 units on the lot. The property owner would have to make that change and spend that money on adding more units to their lot.
Thanks, Emma. We see a couple more questions coming in. We want to talk a little bit, and I'll turn this actually to Josh Williams and then Luis maybe. This is one tool, this proposed zoning amendment in the city's broader effort to address housing, the housing shortage, and in general modernize our zoning code. Actually, I think I'll start with Luis. Luis, what are some other efforts that the city is doing in addition to this zoning study to address housing? That is funding or other operations by PED. What else is the city doing?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Good evening, everybody. Luis. So the city is working on housing in a variety of different ways. We have, in the recent past, you may know, updated the parking regulations to eliminate minimum parking requirements. That certainly doesn't mean people will not provide parking. Parking is still considered an amenity for housing, and so oftentimes with new housing development, parking will be provided. But when you eliminate the requirement, it gives a little more flexibility to housing developers to create options that don't rely on the incredibly expensive cost or depend on the cost of developing a lot of parking for the housing. So it just makes it a little more flexible, trying to move towards other opportunities for people to get around the city, including transit. There's other zoning studies we've done in the past. The residential multifamily zoning study a couple of years ago, which made the higher density residential districts a little more flexible for supporting that kind of development. And then on the program and funding side, there's the Housing Trust Fund that has been it's a funding allocated by the City Council, supported by the administration, of course, to support a wide array of rental and ownership housing supports. So thinking about things like down payment assistance, support for multifamily development, including affordable units at various levels. 60% of area median income is a common threshold that gets used with rental housing production. And so all of that is to support more production of very scarce affordable housing in the city. But public financing is limited, so we're trying to use the zoning code to support to incentivize the market and sort of smaller property owners, small developers, to also provide more housing solutions, whether it's for your own family or for others in St. Paul who need it, across the range of incomes that exist. We have programs that are also aimed at small developers that would produce probably predominantly for sale housing. So we work a lot with community development corporations and neighborhood organizations such as NeighborWorks Home Partners, Dayton's Bluff Neighborhood Housing Services, and others that produce affordable ownership housing, oftentimes at 80 or 60% of area median income. So lots of different things going on in the housing space.
Thanks, Luis. And I'm going to keep putting you on the spot. We had a question. Do you have any clues as to how many units might be produced over the next 10 years? And it looked like you were starting to write an answer. Do you want to go ahead and answer that verbally?
Yeah, I was gonna put that in the chat, but it's a little bit of a guessing game. So much of the city is built up, and so the extent to which the areas that Emma was talking about, the R1 through RT2 zoned areas, that's a real big chunk of the city. And so if you look at the comprehensive plan, which is probably your best clue about the future, at least our best estimates, there's a big range of between 1,300 and up to 4,000 units in the urban neighborhood areas. Of course, we don't know that would happen. That would be subject to, are there land opportunities? Are there subdivisions happening where people are doing lot splits and selling off, half of their lot and then a new house going in, or, like in this case, a duplex or something like that. So it's sort of high level assumptions, or, using the forecast that the Met Council provides us, and then we end up having to allocate growth throughout the city, and thinking about where's the most of the growth happening in places like downtown and corridors and large redevelopment sites. The Heights on the east side, or the Ford site on the western part of the city. There's also the West Side Flats, which is still a project or an area that could support more housing development. That already has supported some. So it is a bit of a using the forecasts that we get from the Met Council and trying to understand where is the growth likely to happen, but also where are we best set up to support it. So the actual higher number of units is really going to be in areas that have greater infrastructure, greater access to water and roads and all those things.
Thanks, Luis. Of course, a lot of this potential development that could come from these zoning changes are dependent on who will actually be doing them: property owners, small scale developers, larger developers. Josh, do you want to talk a little bit about the players in this space who might be building?
Yes, thank you, Michael. And I think that's a great segue from what Luis was talking about. you know, obviously we're doing a bit of forecasting here, but we do have, you know, we can look at the experience of other municipalities in making these changes. We can also call back to what Emma said about, you know, land use change or zoning changes does not equal immediate land use change. Some of the factors we've been thinking about is, you know, one, who is going to be doing these types of projects. And I know we've seen that based on the work we did with our consultants, they looked a lot at kind of what sort of level of return, and that this may have been put in the chat already, but what level of return are the sort of the big players expecting. And, you know, while these projects certainly can make financial sense, it's not the kind of project, because of the level of effort and it's sort of a one-off, that attracts big developers. So, you know, we're looking more to people who may do this on the side, or people who already have an investment in the community, which is a positive, but that means it's less likely to proceed quickly in terms of the number of units that we see. And that's, you know, sort of part of our outlook. We're planning for the long-term future of the city, not just the next couple years. Another thing that's important to think about is there are, despite, you know, I think we've come up with really good or the study, I should say the study recommends some very helpful changes, but there are still challenges. You know, it's one thing if you have an empty lot to come in and do a project where you might add multiple units. It's another thing where you have an existing unit. There are still going to be challenges regarding utilities and other things. So, you know, I think in general, we expect that there will be a longer term transition in terms of those units, and let me rephrase that, a longer term transition in terms of building additional units and so forth. And those are some of the reasons why there are just challenges out there despite the zoning changes.
Thanks, Josh. One type of dwelling that appears a little bit more accessible for the average homeowner to add to their property is an accessory dwelling unit. We've had some questions about how those factor in to these broader hoped for changes. First of all, what is an accessory dwelling unit? It is an apartment or detached home that has everything that any other home or apartment would have: sanitary facilities, kitchen, sleeping space, etc. It is a full dwelling unit, but there are some restrictions on it. The goal of the accessory dwelling unit is to make sure that there is housing available in a space that is still sensitive to the occupancy of the property, how many people are using the property, the size, generally what is the development form of that property. And so it's meant to be kind of a subordinate dwelling unit. And so there's size limitations, and then there are also occupancy limitations. These have sort of notoriously been liberalized over the last few years around Minneapolis and St. Paul. Regulations allowing these have been freed up, and they haven't taken off necessarily as quickly as people thought that they would. We are seeing increases in St. Paul, and I think Minneapolis and other suburban cities around the Twin Cities have seen increases. But there are some other difficulties. Finding financing can be a difficulty. A lot of banks and lending institutions don't necessarily know how to assess the value of a property with one of these ADUs attached to a home or in the backyard or maybe to the side of the house. So they're still figuring out their lending programs, and there are slowly banks and lending institutions coming online who are willing to take a chance and offer loans and mortgages or maybe construction loans for this type of dwelling unit. Another is a similar difficulty actually to just building a full house, which is that you generally will need to get a sanitary line back there. You'll need to get a water line back there. You'll need to have a walkway back there. There are just some site layout considerations that come by having a dwelling unit. Sounds like, so we have a question about owner occupancy requirement. So for an accessory dwelling unit, until recently, we had the requirement that the property owner had to live in either the accessory dwelling unit or its associated principal dwelling unit. I believe it was 2021, we deleted that requirement. And so you no longer, if you're the owner of the property, you no longer need to live in either of those units. That just gives a little bit of freedom. Let's say that you are the long-term owner of a home, you want to build an ADU and then move to a retirement home, maybe turn it over to a child or to a renter. You can now do that, and it's a little source of income and also just additional housing, which is the mega goal of this zoning study. There were a couple other topics that we wanted to address. And again, we are still here for a little bit, so if you want to put some questions in the Q&A box, we would love to address those. Josh, would you mind talking about, actually, I'll send this to Emma. Emma, would you talk about any other changes to process accompanying these zoning changes, site plan review or building permit processes, and then also talk about how utility requirements, building code requirements, that sort of thing play into these potential zoning changes?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So, so yeah, while zoning, we are enabling more zoning options with this proposed ordinance. There still are a lot of things in play. So building code requirements, those are state requirements. Utility requirements are also a state code thing and interpretation by our city building official. So there's a lot of things at play that the property would need to meet. And in terms of the process, there's a site plan review process that that kind of kicks in at a certain threshold, and usually it's for anything other than, currently it's for anything other than the erection or enlargement of a single family home or a two-family home. So that brings a lot of properties to site plan review. Site plan review is basically a lot of different city departments sit down virtually together and review, provide their comments on a development on the site plan, and check it for code consistency and make sure that everything, utilities, fire access requirements, forestry takes a look at it. There's a lot of different components as site plan review. And as part of this, the proposal, we are looking at ways that we can kind of streamline it for certain development types. It currently is proposed that that 3 or more new housing units on a lot would not have to go to, or sorry, three or more new ones would have to go to site plan review. So kind of expanding that list of ones that would not have to go to site plan review. But this is kind of an ongoing thing where we're hearing more from our friends in the Department of Safety and Inspections. So this is kind of a learning process, and we're seeing what we can to help simplify and streamline this process. But I guess moving forward, for implementation, we'll be doing as much as we can to help prepare prospective developers in this process. Not everybody is familiar with the permitting process and the development process with the city. So we're doing everything that we can to improve our website and make resources accessible so everyone can understand this process. But anybody else on my team too, please jump in on this process.
Yeah, Luis, I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And Emma, thank you. I just wanted to add to what you said, Emma. And so part of this, kind of reading between the lines, lots of zoning code, lots of processes that we're talking about. One message we learned really strongly from our consultants and from the small developers that we engaged in this process, so that we had a technical advisory committee that advised us on, we've done this kind of single family duplex sort of townhome infill, and this is our experience. These are our challenges. And one of the things a few things they pointed out was it's costly, time consuming, and unpredictable every time we face a zoning regulation that that's going to make it harder for us to produce housing like this. And so the question is the regulation really needed to achieve what the city is trying to do? And so one example of that is setbacks being fairly large under the current zoning code. And so really what we learned is that the actual process, not only the application for a variance from that requirement, that's costly, but the time that goes into it is costly. Time is money, right? And then at the end of that process, there's no certainty that they're going to even get that regulatory relief. And so all of that can add up to essentially kill small development, small projects like these. It's not necessarily talking about, a 100-unit multifamily apartment building. This is more in terms of, I want to build a 3-unit townhome or 2 twin homes on a larger site, and I need this and this, these minor changes or variances, and they really don't know what's going to happen at that Board of Zoning Appeals. Part of what the challenge is with that process is it's hard to get a variance. It's very hard to meet the findings of a variance through that process. And so in other words, it's hard to get an approval recommendation from city staff, because once you have those zoning laws in place as they are, the idea is that you follow those. And so all those costs in that time adds up, and it basically makes a lot of these projects infeasible. So that has led us to try to figure out how can we streamline the review process as much as possible, because at the end of the day, a twin home is very similar to a single family home in terms of how it's going to situate on a lot. You just have a little more utilities, those sorts of things. So can we streamline the process so that way it's actually going to get these projects from negative to possibly neutral to even possibly net positive financially? And so that was kind of part of the ethic that underlies a lot of the proposal.
Thanks, Luis. Emma, I think we've addressed the questions that have come to us today, and some of the extra topics that we just wanted to discuss a little more free form afterwards. Do you want to talk about how people can engage going forward and what our schedule is?
Yeah, so just a reminder that these webinars are posted on the website. Feel free to share with people who did not get to attend this but wanted to. We would love to hear your comments by noon on Thursday, April 13th. You can submit it by email or email. And then we do encourage your participation in the Planning Commission public hearing on Friday, April 14th. And the website has a lot of good resources for you to look through if you are looking for more information. So yeah, thank you so much for coming, everyone. We appreciate your time and your interest in the study, and thank you for your questions. Again, thank you.
Thanks, Luis. I think Luis has one more note for us.
Yeah, echoing what Emma said, thank you everybody for joining us. Please take some time to look through it if you haven't already. There's some overview slides as well, and the public hearing on the 14th. We'd love to see you at the Planning Commission if you'd like to testify and or send your comments. I believe Emma may have mentioned this, but there's a couple of events coming up. There's a session that we're putting together, the communications about, co-hosted by the East Side Freedom Library on April 11th, sort of around the noon hour. kind of a lunch and learn opportunity, really focused on the east side in this study and sort of what it means. So folks could come and learn a little bit more, get some of the same information we presented tonight, but also have a chance to have some Q&A, but also conversation and discussion in person in the community. So that's one that we'll be promoting shortly, but if you're an East Sider, maybe mark your calendar or spread the word about that, that opportunity. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Luis. All right, well, thanks everyone for coming, and have a good evening.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.